The twin sons of Terra Luna pressed their heat through the canopy, searing Daniel Hart's shoulders as he pushed through the undergrowth. The forest here was different from Earth's. Trees with wide purple leaves that turned the light into a muted violet haze. Air heavy with resin and strange floral scents. Sweat ran down his temples and soaked into the collar of his rough khaki shirt, but he barely noticed. 3 months of wandering had hardened him to the climate, just as 3 years of grief had hardened him to everything else. He adjusted the strap of his utility pack, shifting the weight so it stopped biting into the scar tissue on his left shoulder. A Marine scar souvenir from battles fought before he'd walked away from the colonial course. He had promised himself he was done with fighting, done with trying to save people. Yet no matter how far he ran from New Singapore Spaceport, from the voices of a galaxy that kept marching forward, the memory of Eliza never left him. Eliza, with her steady laugh, her plans for their child, gone in the blink of a collapsing gateway. 12,000 dead, and among them his world. Move forward, not back, he muttered, forcing his legs up a slope, his boots biting into soft moss. He lived by those words now, though every step felt like penance. At the crest of the hill, the trees broke and the violet light opened into a clearing he hadn't explored before. He heard it before he saw it, the sound of stone grating against stone, the dull thud of rocks falling into place, the labored grunt of someone working beyond their strength. Instinct froze him at the tree line, senses sharpening. His body remembered patrol drills, threat assessments, ambush protocols. Even if his mind told him he wanted nothing more than quiet dot in the center of the clearing, bent over a half-built wall of rough stones was a figure he hadn't expected. A woman humanoid, her skin a luminous shade of pale blue that glistened faintly under the suns. Long silver hair was tied back in a braid, swaying as she bent to lift another stone block. Her movements were clumsy, not unskilled but burdened. Daniel's eyes traced the curve of her swollen belly, and a shock went through him like a pulse from an old wound. Pregnant, alone, building a shelter out of raw stone with hands that trembled under the effort. She tried to hoist a stone nearly half her size. Her arms gave out halfway, and she staggered, breath catching in her throat before she set it down with a sharp sound of frustration. For a moment she leaned against the unfinished wall, one hand pressed instinctively over her stomach, eyes closed as she breathed. The gesture pierced him. He had seen that pose before Eliza, standing in their old apartment, one hand resting on her belly with that mix of pride and tenderness. His chest constricted. Without thinking, he stepped forward into the clearing. A branch cracked under his boot. The woman spun with startling speed, silver braid whipping behind her. A short blade appeared in her hand, gleaming against the violet light. Her eyes' brilliant sky blue narrowed on him, pupils pinpoints under the sun's. Daniel raised his hand slowly, palms outward. Easy. Didn't mean to startle you. His voice sounded rough to his own ears, as though unused for too long. I'm Daniel Hart. I live a few clicks east. Human, she said, voice low and melodic, but edged with wariness. Last I checked. He offered a faint smile, though her blade didn't waver. Looks like you're working on something big out here. Her eyes flicked toward the half-built wall, then back to him, her stance never relaxing. I require no assistance. Daniel's gaze shifted deliberately to the large stone she'd failed to lift. He nodded toward it. Respectfully, I think you do. I was an engineer with the Colonial Marines. Building things is what I do. For a long moment she studied him, free hand still guarding her stomach. The silence pressed in, broken only by the buzz of insects and the distant cry of some bird-like creature. Finally, she lowered the blade, though she didn't sheath it. I am Neri Leary, she said carefully. Her voice carried the fatigue of someone who had been surviving, not living. Time is not on my side. Her hand shifted again to her belly. Daniel, inclined his head, the old ache in his chest stirring. "Before the little one arrives," he said quietly, "then let me help. You can tell me what you need, and I'll do the lifting." Her eyes softened just slightly, suspicion giving way to something else, weariness, maybe, or the flicker of hope she was too proud to admit. She glanced once toward the distant hills, a quick darting look filled with unease. Then back at him. "Both the elements," she said at last. "And other things." Daniel didn't press. He just unshouldered his pack, rolled his shoulders, and walked to the heavy stone she hadn't been able to move. As he crouched and gripped it, he felt her gaze on him, assessing, measuring, deciding. The weight dragged at his muscles, but he welcomed it, welcomed the strain, because for the first time in years, he wasn't carrying only his grief. He was carrying something forward. But he turned toward her, seeing not just weariness in her posture, but the scars of someone who had already lost everything once. His chest tightened. "I'm sorry," he said, and for once the words didn't feel empty. Her eyes flickered, some private storm passing across them. "Do not be. I chose him. I would choose him again." She touched her belly, fingers trembling for the first time. "I will not let them take what remains of him." Daniel crouched beside her, resting his arms across his knees. "You're being hunted." It wasn't a question. She gave a short nod. "The Purity Unit. They seek to end what they call contamination." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "They will not stop." The forests seemed to grow darker around them, the canopy absorbing the last rays of sunlight. Daniel's instincts surged, the Marine in him reawakening with a clarity he had tried to bury. He could almost hear Eliza's voice. "You can't save everyone, Don." But he looked at Neri, sitting weary and defiant on the ground, and he knew the choice was already made. "They'll have to go through me first," he said. Her eyes widened slightly, taken aback by his certainty. "You barely know me." "I know enough." For a long time she just stared at him, as though weighing the truth of his words. At last she rose again, slower this time, but her shoulders straighter. She turned back to the wall. "Then we must finish before nightfall." They worked until the sky burned orange and violet, until their shadows stretched long across the clearing. By the time they stopped, 4 sturdy walls stood around them, the beginnings of a roof in place. Not much, but it was sheltered. Daniel leaned against the doorway, chest heaving, hands coated with dust. "It'll hold till tomorrow. I can come back. Bring tools, food." Neri stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to the stone. In the fading light, her skin glowed like living twilight. Her eyes lingered on him, suspicion and gratitude warring in her gaze. Finally, she inclined her head. "You may return." As he gathered his pack, she called after him, voice sharper than before. "Why?" Daniel turned, startled. "Why what?" "Why help me? You know nothing of me, of what I carry." He hesitated, memories threatening to swamp him, the soft curve of Eliza's belly, the laughter they'd never share, the silence that followed. He steadied himself. "Let's just say I recognize someone who needs a friend when I see them." Her expression shifted, some unreadable emotion crossing her face. Then she looked away, her silver braid swinging as she turned back to the half-built home. Daniel walked into the gathering dusk, but for the first time in years, the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. The next morning broke in amber fire, the twin suns rising side by side above the violet tree line. Daniel returned with a heavier pack than before, tools clinking faintly with each step. He had barely slept, haunted not by Eliza's absence for once, but by the image of Neri, alone among unfinished walls, defying a galaxy intent on erasing her. She was already working when he reached the clearing. Her braid swung as she bent over the wall, fitting smaller stones into gaps with the same steady determination he had seen the day before. The sight stirred something in him, a fragile thread of purpose. "You started without me. he called gently. She turned, startled, then relaxed. Her eyes scanned the supplies as he set the pack down. You brought much. Can't build on an empty stomach, he replied, handing her a strip of protein ration. She accepted it without comment, though her gaze lingered on him a beat longer than before. They worked in companionable silence, Daniel hoisting beams into place, while Neri smoothed the joints with careful hands. Once, their shoulders brushed as they leaned into a line of stone, and Daniel felt again the coolness of her skin, a contrast so sharp it made him shiver despite the heat dot by midday. Sweat darkened his shirt, and Neri's movements had grown slower, her breath shorter. She leaned against the wall more often now, fingers circling her belly in a gesture that had become instinct. Daniel was about to suggest a break when he caught the flicker of her eyes toward the distant hills. Not once, not casually. Repeatedly he followed her gaze, narrowing his eyes. At first he saw only the shimmer of heat over the ridges, the purple canopy shifting in the breeze. Then movement. Pinpricks of light gliding low across the horizon, too regular, too steady for anything natural. The faint hum reached his ears a moment later, barely audible but unmistakable to a man who had once tracked enemy drones through canyon dust. Storms. Damn, he muttered under his breath. Neri stiffened. Her hand closed around the hilt of the blade at her belt, eyes wide with a fear she tried to mask. They've found me. Who? He asked, though he already knew. The genetic purity unit. The words left her lips like a curse. They will not stop until my child is ended. Daniel's blood ran cold. He thought of Eliza, of the child he had lost before it ever took a breath. He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, burning away hesitation. Then we don't stay here. Neri shook her head, pressing her palm to the stone wall. I cannot leave. This was to be our refuge. They'll burn it to ash, Daniel said flatly. I've seen how purist squads operate. Small teams first, then a sweep, then sterilization if they don't find what they want. You stay here. You're already dead. Her chin lifted, defiant even in fear. You speak as though you know them. I know soldiers who believe in nothing but orders, he said, voice low. Doesn't matter what uniform they wear. I've seen what they do to innocents caught in their path, and I'll be damned if I watch it happen again. Silence fell between them, broken only by the hum growing louder in the distance. Neri's eyes searched his face, as if weighing the truth in his voice. At last she whispered, Why would you risk yourself for me? For what I carry. Daniel met her gaze, steady as stone. Because no one should lose their family before it begins. Not you, not your child. Not again. For a heartbeat, her composure cracked. The blade trembled in her hand before she sheathed it. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Where? My place. 3 clicks east, he said, already gathering what little she owned. It's secure, defensible. They'll have to go through a fortress to reach you there. Neri hesitated, glancing back at the unfinished shelter, the stones she had stacked with such effort. Her fingers brushed the wall one last time, a farewell to a dream she had tried to build alone. Then she turned, silver braid swinging, and moved to his side as they left the clearing. Daniel's pulse quickened. His bunker had been a retreat, a tomb for his grief. Now it was about to become a battlefield, and for the first time in years, he welcomed the fight. The trek eastward took longer than Daniel liked. Neri moved with surprising grace for someone so far along in pregnancy, but even her agility couldn't disguise the exhaustion weighing down each step. Daniel kept glancing at the canopy, tracking the hum of patrol drones as they shifted and faded. He set a pace just fast enough to keep distance without pushing her too far. Every instinct screamed urgency, but he forced himself to match her limits. By the time the purple forest thinned, and the hillside rose before them. Neri's breaths came in shallow gasps. Daniel pushed aside a curtain of low branches and revealed a reinforced entrance, half buried in stone. From the outside, it looked like part of the ridge, but his palm pressed against a hidden panel drew a soft hiss and a metallic grind. A door slid open, cool air spilling from within. Neri paused, eyes wide. "You live." In a fortress. Daniel gave a humorless shrug. "Old habits. Marines taught me to always have a fallback position." He gestured inside. "Come on. You'll be safe here?" She stepped past him cautiously, silver braid brushing her shoulder as she looked around. The main chamber spread out in a mix of utilitarian steel and surprising warmth. A living space carved from military architecture, softened by wooden shelves, small hand-built tables, even pots of greenery that thrived under soft grow lights. Plants from Earth mingled with Terra Luna's native vines, their violet blossoms glowing faintly. Neri's lips parted in quiet wonder. "You made this place?" "More than a bunker." Daniel set down his pack, keyed the door shut, and moved to the control panel. A green light pulsed as perimeter sensors activated, shields engaging. He checked the readouts automatically. "It's secure. No one gets close without me knowing." Behind him, her voice softened. "You built a home." He froze for a moment, then turned. She had lowered herself onto the couch, her hand circling her belly in that same protective rhythm. Her blue skin seemed almost luminous under the warm light, and for a moment he forgot the steel walls, the threat outside, everything except the sight of her. "I tried," he admitted. "But a place without people isn't much of a home." Their eyes held, silence thick between them. He felt something stir, a dangerous mix of memory and longing. To break it, he crossed into the adjoining room and returned with a thermal blanket and a container of water. He knelt before her, offering both. "You should rest. There's a bedroom through there." "I'll take the couch." Neri accepted the water, but didn't drink immediately. Instead, she studied him with those clear, unblinking eyes. "Earlier in the clearing," she said, voice quiet but cutting, "you spoke as though you knew what it was to lose family." Daniel swallowed. The ghosts rose up unbidden. "I had a wife, Eliza. We were expecting a child when the Centauri Gateway collapsed. 12,000 dead. She was among them." His throat tightened, the words raw even now. "I walked away from everything after that." For a long time, Neri said nothing. Then, gently, she set the water aside and reached out, her cool fingers brushing against his hand. "I understand loss," she murmured. "My tar was executed for loving me. This child was to be our defiance, and now it is my exile." The bluntness of her words struck him. He should have pulled away, should have buried the ache before it grew into something else. But her touch lingered, cool and steady, anchoring him. "Why tell me this?" he asked hoarsely. Her silver braid slipped forward as she leaned closer, eyes dark with something between sorrow and defiance. "Because you asked why. And because if they come, you should know what you risk your life to protect." The air between them thickened. Daniel felt every beat of his heart in the silence that followed. He was suddenly aware of the faint scent of her skin, crisp and strange, like rain against stone. She had been a stranger in a clearing, blade raised, yet here she was, close enough to touch, trusting him with truths that could kill her. He searched her gaze, desperate for certainty. "Do you want me to stop?" Her fingers tightened around his. Vulnerability and desire flickered in her eyes. "No." The word was soft, but it carried the weight of choice. When he kissed her, it was not gentle. It was the collision of two people who had lost everything and dared, for the first time, to want again. Her skin cooled his heat, his warmth steadied her trembling, and for a few stolen moments, the outside world fell away. and a low hum vibrated through the bunker walls. Daniel tore his lips from hers, instincts flaring. He crossed to the control panel, jaw tightening. A drone passed overhead, its cerulean design unmistakable. "They're searching already," he said grimly. Neri had risen to her feet, one hand pressed protectively to her belly. Fear shadowed her face, but beneath it was steel. "They will not stop." "No," Daniel agreed, pulse racing as he checked the defense systems. "But they'll learn I'm not done fighting." Night fell heavy and quick on Terra Luna, the sun slipping behind jagged ridges and leaving the forest awash in shadows. Daniel Hart stood at the bunker's control panel, watching green dots crawl across the perimeter grid. Drones, ground scouts. The Purity unit had closed their net faster than he expected. "They'll box us in by dawn," he muttered. His hand brushed the pulse rifle laid across the console. He hadn't wanted to use it again, but some parts of the Marine never died. Neri stood behind him, silver braid draped over one shoulder, her other hand circling her belly. Her expression was calm, but Daniel noticed how her lips pressed tight against pain she didn't voice. "You know a way out," she said. He turned toward her, startled by the certainty in her tone. "There are caves," he admitted. 3 clicks northeast. They run under the ridge and connect to the evacuation routes. We could reach the human medical outpost on the far side." Her eyes flicked briefly to her stomach. "Then we go now. You can barely stand." "I can move," she insisted. "This child will not be born in a bunker under siege." The raw determination in her voice silenced him. He grabbed a tactical bag, stuffing it with rations, water, ammunition, and the small pouch of dried herbs Neri had carried since the clearing. His gut twisted when he saw her wince, as she tightened her belt across her hips. "Are you in pain?" he asked, sharper than intended. Neri steadied herself against the wall. Contractions began during the night. Irregular, but growing stronger. Daniel froze. His mind leapt to images he'd tried to bury Eliza, doubled over in their old apartment, laughing at the kick of a child who would never take a breath. His pulse thundered. "You should have told me." Her gaze cut to his, cool and unflinching. Would it have changed our situation? He couldn't answer. Instead, he slung the bag over his shoulder and keyed open a secondary hatch at the rear of the bunker. The night air rushed in, cool and damp, carrying the faint hum of drones prowling overhead. "Stay close," he whispered. They slipped into the forest, Daniel leading with rifle raised, Neri moving behind him with a grace that surprised him. Her kind had evolved in darkness. Her eyes glowed faintly, attuned to every shift of shadow. She moved like water, quiet despite her condition, while he felt like a clumsy giant crashing through brush. Once they froze as a searchlight swept across the trees. Daniel could hear the thrum of cerulean voices carried on the wind. His body tensed, every instinct telling him to fight. Neri touched his arm lightly, shaking her head. She pointed toward a stream trickling through rocks. "They use thermal scans," she whispered. "Your body burns like fire against this world. If you walk the stream, they will lose your trail." He raised a brow. "Strategic analyst?" Her lips twitched in something close to a smile. "Before fugitive, yes." So they followed the stream, Daniel knee-deep in icy water, Neri ghosting along the stony bank. The cold bit into him, but it masked his heat. He found himself admiring her resourcefulness, even as worry gnawed at him with every pained breath she took. After nearly a kilometer, the trees thinned. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged and dark. Daniel guided her toward a fissure hidden by vines. He shoved them aside, revealing the narrow slit of an opening. This way. They squeezed through, the rock scraping his shoulders. Inside, the air was cool and damp, lit faintly by patches of bioluminescent fungi. Pale blue light shimmered on Neri's skin, making her look almost ethereal. For a moment, Daniel just stared. She belonged to these caverns in a way he never could. Her kind were night-born, secret keepers. Yet here she was, trusting him, a human widower with scars he'd never healed. The caves wound deep, water dripping in steady rhythm. Daniel's boots echoed softly, but Nairi moved silent as shadow. They pressed on for nearly half an hour before she staggered. A sharp gasp escaping her lips. Daniel was at her side instantly, catching her weight. "What is it?" Her hand clutched his arm with surprising strength. "Contraction," she hissed, her cool skin damp with sweat. It passed after a moment, leaving her pale and trembling. He steadied her against the wall, heart pounding. "We can stop rest." Her eyes blazed with stubborn fire. "No, if we stop, they catch us." He wanted to argue, but another distant rumble cut through the cavern wall's explosions. Muffled, but close. Jackson. The old Marine had promised to buy them time, and by the sound of it, the diversion had begun. "Your friend fights for us," Neri said softly, her voice carrying both awe and guilt. Daniel tightened his grip on her arm. "He fights because I asked. I fight because I can't watch another family ripped away." Her expression shifted, something unreadable flickering there, fear, gratitude, and something warmer. She leaned closer as another contraction rippled through her forehead nearly brushing his chest. He held her until it passed, the cool of her skin seeping into him like rain on burning stone. When she lifted her head again, her eyes glowed faintly with reflected fungi light. "Then let us keep moving," she whispered. Daniel adjusted his pack, pulse rifle heavy in his other hand, and together they pressed deeper into the labyrinth of stone. Behind them, the sounds of battle thundered. Ahead lay the medical outpost, and a berth neither of them was ready for. And for the first time since Eliza's death, Daniel Hart knew he had something worth carrying again. The caves spilled them out into a wooded hollow behind the human medical outpost, just as dawn bled across the horizon. Daniel's lungs burned, his shirt clung to him with sweat, and Neri leaned heavily against him, her breaths ragged. Every few minutes she would tense, fingers clutching his arm as another contraction seized her. He forced himself not to think about how quickly they were coming. Through the thinning mist, the squat shape of the outpost came into view, modest, little more than reinforced prefab walls and a single comms tower. But to Daniel, it looked like salvation. Outside, 3 armored figures crouched in cover, pulse rifles leveled at the tree line. At their head, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard straightened as he spotted them. "Damn, Hart," Jackson called, his voice carrying even over the distant crack of gunfire. "Still finding trouble in all the wrong places?" Daniel managed a grim smile. "You always said I had a gift." Jackson's gaze flicked to Neri, her belly unmistakable beneath Daniel's arm. His expression shifted, but he only gave her a respectful nod. "Ma'am, let's get you inside. Docs are prepped and waiting." Inside the sterile corridors, the air was sharp with antiseptic. A team of medics rushed forward, guiding Neri onto a stretcher despite her protests. Daniel tried to follow, but Jackson caught his arm. "Give them a minute," the older Marine said. His voice was low, urgent. "Intel came through while you were underground. That child isn't just any hybrid. Meridian genes carry a rare trait, telepathic potential. The Ceruleans have tried and failed to splice it for centuries. If she gives birth, it proves their purity doctrine's a sham. That's why the purifiers are here in force." Daniel's stomach tightened. "So they'll stop at nothing." Jackson's weathered face hardened. "They've already got authorization to sterilize the region if they can't take her alive." Orbital strike. Before Daniel could respond, a thunderous impact rattled the walls. Lights flickered. A Marine shouted from down the hall. "East wing breached. Purifiers incoming." Daniel's pulse surged. He grabbed the rifle from Jackson's shoulder, his old instincts roaring to life. "Where do you want me?" Jackson's grin was wolfish despite the chaos. "Thought you'd never ask." They sprinted toward the east corridor, where blue-white bolts of cerulean energy were already lancing through smoke. Marines held the line behind overturned gurneys, their fire lighting up the haze. Daniel slid in beside them, pulse rifle steady in his hands. He hadn't fought in years, but his body remembered. He fired in controlled bursts, dropping 2 advancing purifiers before they could clear the door. Just like Proxima 4, Jackson shouted over the din. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We lost Proxima." Not this time. They held for 10, 15 brutal minutes, falling back step by step as the purifiers pressed harder. Daniel fought with grim precision, every squeeze of the trigger fueled by a single thought. Neri, struggling in some sterile room, bringing life into a galaxy determined to erase it. Then, all at once, the world changed. A cry pierced the chaos not of pain, but of new life. The sound rolled down the corridor like a wave, cutting through gunfire and smoke. At the same moment, Daniel felt something brush his mind, gentle, curious, impossibly pure. Not words, not thought, but raw emotion, wonder, safety, the simple instinct to love. He staggered, nearly dropping his rifle. Around him, Marines faltered mid-shot, blinking in shock. Across the hall, purifiers froze. Their weapons lowered, several clutching their heads, eyes wide with bewilderment. The battle dissolved into silence as every soldier, human and cerulean alike, stood transfixed. "The child," Daniel whispered, the truth sinking into him with shattering clarity. "She's reaching us." He ran. He tore through the smoke-choked halls, past stunned medics and speechless soldiers, until he burst into the delivery room. Neri lay on the bed, hair damp and silver strands clinging to her face. Her skin glowed faintly under the harsh lights, but her eyes were alive, radiant with triumph and exhaustion. Cradled in her arms was the child. Daniel stopped short, breath caught in his chest. The infant's skin shimmered a soft lavender, a seamless blend of cerulean blue and meridian red. Her eyes were open, iridescent silver that seemed too wise for a newborn, and a faint light pulsed gently beneath her skin with each tiny heartbeat. As Daniel stepped closer, the child's gaze fixed on him. A warmth swept through his mind, stronger now, carrying a single impression that struck him to his core recognition. She knew him. She claimed him. Neri looked up, her voice a whisper, yet carrying all the weight of the universe. A daughter. Eliza Tarr. Daniel's throat closed, a rush of grief and wonder tangling inside him at the name. He reached out, his calloused finger brushing the child's impossibly small hand. The mental touch deepened instantly, emotions flooding him. Curiosity, trust, love without question. Behind him, the door opened. Ambassador Hughes entered, flanked by a stern cerulean representative and a tall Meridian consul. Both stopped in their tracks, caught in the child's glow. Hughes spoke softly, reverent. The first living bridge between species. No one can deny it now. Daniel barely heard him. His world had narrowed to Neri, exhausted but smiling, and the lavender child in her arms, who had silenced an army with nothing more than being born. He had lost one family. Against all odds, he had found another. 6 months had remade the valley. Where once Daniel Hart's bunker crouched like a scar in the hillside, now walls of stone and timber stretched outward, weaving into gardens and courtyards. The skeleton of his fortress had softened, layered brick by brick with Neri's designs and his own laboring hands. Where he had once built alone in silence, he now built with laughter in the air, and a lavender-skinned child, chasing butterflies of light, she conjured it. Daniel stood on the deck as the twin suns sank low, their light catching on Eliza Tarr's silver eyes. She sat upright in the grass, steady already at half a year old, her tiny hands weaving simple loops of native grasses under Neri's gentle guidance. The glow beneath her skin pulsed faintly, not uncontrolled now but measured, almost playful. When she noticed Daniel watching, a brush of thought touched his mind delight, pride, and a tugging insistence that he join them. He laughed softly, descending the steps. He had grown used to her touch, to the way her emotions spilled into him like warm water. At first it had startled him. Now it felt as natural as breathing. "She has been asking for you," Neri said, her melodic voice carrying amusement. "Has she now?" Daniel scooped Eliza into his arms, her cool skin radiant against his chest. The child's telepathic brush sharpened into a clear impression. Mine. He pressed his forehead gently to hers. "Yours too, little star." Neri watched them with a look that still struck him to the core. She had changed in these months. The hunted fugitive had given way to something steadier, a woman who no longer lived only for survival, but for future. She had become both mother and symbol, courted by cerulean progressives, respected by meridians, and most astonishing to her, protected by humans who had welcomed her child without hesitation. "Jackson says the accord has been ratified," Daniel told her as he set Eliza down. The baby tottered on unsteady legs, reaching for Neri's braid. "Hybrid families now have recognition across colonial space." Neri's expression softened, though her eyes held a shadow of caution. "The purity faction will not vanish overnight." "No," Daniel agreed. "But the tide's turned. They can't deny what she is. What we are." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, warm and cool. "They'll have to build their world around it." As the suns dipped lower, Eliza clapped her hands. Tiny sparks of light shimmered around her, drifting like fireflies. Neri laughed, a sound Daniel had thought he'd never hear from her in those first grim days, and the sound unlocked something in him every time. Later, when the child slept in her nursery, painted with earth and cerulean starscapes, Daniel and Neri sat together on the deck with a bottle of wine. The night air was cool, the moons of Terra Luna rising silver above the ridge. Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked quietly. "When I found you, fighting those stones. I thought you would rob me," Neri admitted with a smile that curved her lips. "Or worse. Humans had such a reputation. And now?" Her blue fingers traced the lines of his scarred hands. "Now I know the truth. Dangerous, unpredictable, yes, but also capable of compassion no other species dares. You build bridges where others see only walls." He gazed out at the expanded homestead, stone and wood blended with flowering vines. "We've come a long way from that little shelter. One brick at a time," she murmured. Daniel turned her in his arms, kissed her with the certainty of a man who had finally stopped running. Above them, the stars wheeled silent and eternal. Below, in a home they had built together, their daughter slept light, and mine both reaching out into a galaxy that would never be the same. And for the first time since Eliza's death, Daniel Hart believed in tomorrow.